You've been thinking about that conversation for 3 days. Not constantly, it comes and goes. But it keeps returning, and every time it does, you replay a slightly different version of it. What you said, what they meant, what you should have said instead. Whether they are still thinking about it too, whether you damaged something, whether it was actually fine and you're the only one making it a problem. You don't choose to think about it. It just happens. And while part of your mind is doing that, another part is also running a background check on something you need to do next week, recalculating a decision you made 6 months ago, preparing for a conversation that may never happen, and quietly building a case for why a thing you want is probably not going to work out. All of this simultaneously, without your permission. People around you function. They finish a task and move to the next one. They have a difficult conversation and then apparently stop thinking about it. They go to bed and fall asleep within minutes. You watch them and wonder what is different about you, whether your brain is broken, whether this is just what your life is going to feel like forever. Here's what's actually happening inside your head, and why it is not what you think it is. Your brain has a network that most people have never heard of. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, the DMN. It is a system of interconnected brain regions that activates not when you are focused on a task, but when you are not. When you are resting, daydreaming, not actively engaged with the external world, this network switches on. Its job, as far as neuroscience understands it, is to do something that sounds harmless and even useful. Simulate. It runs mental models of the past and future. It processes social information. It rehearses scenarios. It imagines what other people might be thinking. It constructs and reconstructs narratives about who you are and what your life means. In moderate doses, this is genuinely useful. It's part of how humans plan, empathize, create, and make sense of their experience. The default mode network is not a bug. It is one of the most sophisticated features of the human brain. But in some people, this network does not switch off the way it should. Normally, there is a reciprocal relationship between the default mode network and the task-positive network, the systems your brain uses when you are actively focused on something external. When one activates, the other quiets down. Focus suppresses the simulation loop. Rest allows it to run. The two systems balance each other. In people who chronically overthink, that balance is disrupted. The default mode network stays hyperactive. It keeps running even when you are trying to focus on something else. It keeps generating scenarios, replaying conversations, building hypothetical situations, running risk assessments, constructing social simulations, all on top of whatever you are actually supposed to be doing. The two systems overlap instead of alternating, and the result is a brain that never fully rests and never fully focuses. A brain that is always doing too many things at once, none of them on purpose, and none of them to completion. This is what people mean when they say they cannot turn their brain off. They are not being dramatic. The mechanism is real. Their default mode network is not respecting the off switch. And here is what this actually feels like from the inside. Every decision becomes an event. Not because the decision is genuinely complex, but because your simulation network immediately generates every possible outcome of every possible choice and begins evaluating them all in parallel. You want to send an email? Simple enough. But your brain is also running. What if the tone is wrong? What if they take it the wrong way? What if I should wait? What if waiting makes it worse? What if I should call instead? What if calling seems too much? What if the email is too short? What if it's too long? You spend 40 minutes on 3 sentences. Not because you are indecisive, because your simulation engine is doing its job too thoroughly, on a task that doesn't require it. This is the paralysis, not laziness, not fear of failure in any simple sense. A simulation system running at full capacity on a task that needed 5% of it. And relationships. The way the default mode network processes social information means that conversations, looks, silences, and tones get analyzed with a precision that most people never apply. You catch things that others miss. You pick up on subtleties in body language, in the phrasing someone chose, in what they didn't say. This can make you genuinely perceptive, but it also means that every interaction generates data your brain immediately begins processing. The look they gave you, the pause before they answered, the way the energy in the room shifted, all of it goes into the simulation, and the simulation runs it through every possible interpretation, looking for meaning, looking for threat, looking for what it needs to prepare for next. You are not paranoid. You are running a social threat detection system that was calibrated too high, and it never stops collecting input. The accumulation of all this unprocessed social data is exhausting in a way that is almost impossible to explain to someone who does not experience it. Other people end interactions, and the interaction ends. For you, it continues. You carry it forward into the next hour, the next day, sometimes the next week, turning it over, looking for the thing you might have missed, the signal buried in the subtext. By the time you have finished processing one interaction, 3 more have happened, and each of them is now also in the queue. You are never fully current. Your internal processing is always behind your external life. Sleep becomes difficult because the default mode network, which is supposed to wind down as you rest, keeps finding things to process. You lie there and the simulations continue. You rehearse tomorrow's meeting. You reconstruct yesterday's exchange. You imagine a conversation 6 months from now with someone you haven't spoken to in years. You build entire futures out of things that may never happen. And while all of that is fascinating in a painful way, it is also exhausting. Your body is lying still, but your brain is working. By morning, you have been technically resting for 7 hours and feel like you have been running. There is also the specific cruelty of what happens to your sense of time, because when your brain is simulating past and future simultaneously, the present barely exists. You are physically sitting in a room, but mentally you are in 3 conversations from last week and 2 situations that have not happened yet. This means that the actual moment you are in, the conversation you are having right now, the meal in front of you, the person across from you, registers at a fraction of its actual weight. Not because you don't care, because your simulation engine is consuming so much cognitive bandwidth that there is not enough left over for full presence. You end days feeling like you weren't really there for them. Because neurologically, in a meaningful sense, you weren't. Your body was present, your default mode network was somewhere else entirely. Now here's the part that changes how you understand yourself. Most people who overthink have been told at some point to just stop, to think less, to relax, to not take things so seriously, as if the volume of thought were a choice they are making and could equally unmake. This advice is not just unhelpful, it is based on a complete misunderstanding of what is happening. You are not thinking too much because you are neurotic, or anxious, or weak, or broken. You are thinking too much because your default mode network is hyperactive, and its suppression mechanism is not working the way it should. This is a structural feature of how your brain operates, shaped by a combination of genetics, early experience, environment, and the chronic stimulation patterns of the world you live in now. It is not a personality defect, it is a neurological pattern, and this distinction matters enormously, because you cannot stop a neurological pattern by telling it to stop. You can only change the conditions that keep it running. The default mode network is most hyperactive when there is no clear external focus to suppress it. In other words, the more unstructured mental time you have, the harder the simulation engine runs. This is why overthinking gets worse during idle moments. Lying in bed, sitting in traffic, any gap where there is nothing specific to attend to becomes an opening for the network to flood in with its simulations. Your brain is not failing to rest in those moments. It is doing exactly what a hyperactive default mode network does when given space. It is also why many overthinkers find temporary relief in absorbing tasks or physical activity. Running, intense work, a difficult problem that requires focused attention. These suppress the DMN by engaging the task-positive network, creating the balance that is missing during rest. This is not distraction. This is the brain's suppression mechanism working the way it is supposed to. The problem is that it only works while the focus is maintained. The moment the task ends, the DMN floods back in, often harder than before. The real intervention is not about thinking less. It is about changing the relationship between thought and action. One of the most consistent features of a hyperactive default mode network is that it runs simulations without ever arriving at conclusions. It generates scenarios, evaluates them, generates complications, evaluates those, branches into new scenarios, and loops back. The simulation is not designed to produce a decision, it is designed to prepare for every possibility. And because there are infinite possibilities, it never stops. The loop is closed not by thinking your way through to the end, but by introducing an external interrupt, a decision, an action, a written resolution, anything that gives the simulation a signal that this particular thread has been resolved. This means that one of the most effective things a chronic overthinker can do is externalize thought, not to think better, but to end the loop. When you write something down, your brain registers a kind of closure on it. The simulation no longer needs to hold it in active memory because it is represented externally. The thought has been captured. It has somewhere to live that is not inside your head. This is not journaling as an emotional release. It is a neurological offloading strategy. You are giving the DMN permission to stop processing a thread by placing it somewhere outside the simulation loop. The same principle applies to decisions. A hyperactive DMN will simulate a decision indefinitely unless it receives a clear signal that the decision has been made. Setting a deliberate time boundary works because it turns an open-ended process into a bounded one. Not, I will think about this until I feel certain, but I will think about this for 15 minutes and then decide. The decision made under time constraint is not worse than the decision made after endless simulation. In most cases, it is identical or better, because it has not been contaminated by the diminishing returns of overanalysis, and it comes with the added benefit of not consuming 3 days of your cognitive bandwidth. There is also the question of your body. The default mode network is a brain system, but the brain does not operate in isolation. Chronic physical stillness keeps the simulation running at full intensity. Movement is not a distraction from thinking. It is one of the most reliable ways to interrupt a DMN loop at the biological level. Not because movement stops thought, but because sustained physical activity shifts resources toward motor systems and sensory processing, reducing the energy available for abstract simulation. The thoughts do not disappear during a long walk or a workout. They slow down. They become less insistent. The loop loses its momentum, and that is enough. The last thing to say is this. The same brain that cannot stop simulating is also the brain that catches things others miss, that prepares thoroughly for things that matter, that thinks carefully about people and relationships, that generates ideas with a depth and complexity that requires exactly the kind of networked thinking that your default mode network does natively. This is not a consolation prize. The capacity and the torment come from the same architecture. The goal is not to eliminate the network. It is to learn to direct it, to interrupt it when it is running on nothing, and to trust that a thought does not need to be processed to infinity to be valid. You are not broken. You have a powerful simulation engine that was never given an off switch. And now that you understand the mechanism, you can start working with it instead of fighting it. Here is your actual starting point. Tonight, before you sleep, take every active thought loop running in your head and put it somewhere external. A notes app, a piece of paper, anything. For each one, write one sentence about what you actually want to do about it. Not what you are afraid of, but what you intend. Then put it away. You are not solving everything tonight. You are telling your DMN that these threads have a place to live that is not inside your sleeping brain. Tomorrow, when the simulation starts running on something you cannot act on yet, set a time. Not now. Thursday at 4. And then move your body until the loop loses its grip. You are not a person who thinks too much. You are a person whose default mode network was never taught when to stop. That is a very different problem, and it has a very different solution.